Star Wars. Released in the year 1977, it was a movie that changed the world. With groundbreaking, never-before-seen special effects, a relatable story which captivated audiences, and a battle of the ages against good and evil, Star Wars did everything perfectly. Propelling the world out of the motion picture dark ages, Star Wars broke away from the war movies of the early 1970s, and gave people a fast and fun adventure which they didn't know they wanted. Star Wars is one of the most iconic films of all time. Naturally, when it was re-released in 1997 as the newly dubbed Special Edition, fans were excited to see what Star Wars was originally intended to be. It became clear, however, that fans were not going to be able to see the same movie they did as children. With outdated special effects and a lack of an officially available version of the theatrical release, fans took things into their own hands. To provide a better understanding of why the special editions are so despised and why fan preservations were inevitable, we'll take a look at every major official release of Star Wars, as well as some of the most influential fan preservation projects of the original trilogy that sprouted from the lack of official theatrical releases. The first release we have on our list is the original Star Wars. Releasing in the summer of 1977, Star Wars was an instant hit, breaking box office records and holding them for years to come. Star Wars changed the way movies were made. Loved by fans of all ages, it won its audience over by telling an adventure that went back to the roots of storytelling, with a premise of good versus evil. Harkening back to the old westerns and serial cartoons, the movies were fast and fun enough to appeal to a young audience, with dramatic themes to appeal to the older crowd. The movie was groundbreaking, not just on the story side of things. With stunning art and visuals mixed with a brilliant soundtrack, it's hard not to enjoy Star Wars based on these factors alone. This was the one that started it all, one of the greatest movies of all time. Why it had to change, we don't know. Our next release would come out only a few short years later, in 1981. This release was when the first changes to the original film took place. In April of 1981, Star Wars was re-released to the public for its theatrical re-release. This time, however, no longer did the title crawl open with, "It is a period of civil war." Rather, it was given the title Episode 4, A New Hope, to counterpart the title of Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Return of the Jedi came out in 1983, so their title wasn't relevant yet. Contrary to popular belief, Empire and Jedi released with their title cards in place, each reading the movie's title with their respective Roman numerals that we see today. When people first watched Empire, it was confusing for them to see that the title read Episode 5 instead of Episode 2, but it was quickly overlooked. George Lucas had originally planned Star Wars to have Episode 4, A New Hope in the title sequence, but most of the executives at 20th Century Fox believed that Star Wars wouldn't be a success, so to avoid any potential embarrassment, they told George he couldn't put it in. After Star Wars' success, however, they agreed to let him put it in for the re-releases of the film. While this may be a minor change, it set a precedent for the future which allowed George Lucas to change his films more drastically as he saw fit. The next official release would take place in 1982 for the VHS. There's not much to say about this release, except that it is still one of the only officially available theatrical releases of Star Wars still passed around today. It should be noted, though, that the quality of the VHS master is somewhat questionable by today's standards. Notice how the title reads Episode 4, A New Hope. It seems that the VHS release was the same as the 1981 theatrical re-release. With a different color standard than that of film and numerous VHS artifacts, this master certainly has its downsides. For a family in the 1980s, however, this would have been a must-have item. Next on our list is the 1995 Laserdisc Master. Again, not much is to be said about this release. These are still the theatrical releases. However, they came with a handful of other Laserdisc artifacts which significantly impacted the quality of the film. These include frame smearing, present from a poor digital noise reduction method, and severe aliasing. There was even a piercing magenta tone put over the film unintentionally, making reds look more like pinks. I will go over this specific version a little bit later. You'll see why then. Next, we get our first theater re-release since the early 1980s theatrical re-releases. In the year 1997, George Lucas's special edition was released in theaters and on home video. With numerous additions to the original films, we get our first glimpse of why Star Wars fan preservation projects exist. The CGI additions to the film were not particularly groundbreaking, even by 1997 standards, and unfortunately have aged quite poorly as time has gone on. With added scenes, replaced dialogue, and outdated CGI, it's easy to understand why people carry so much disdain for this edition. Not just because of how bad these versions are, but mainly because there is also no other official option for watching them the way they were originally released. It's either George's way or the highway.
To crush you like a bug.
With the release of the special editions in theaters, we also got VHS and Laserdisc versions in the same year for home video, though it's hard to understand why some people would choose these versions over the theatrical home releases. After the release of the special editions, the altered versions became the standard for any future Star Wars releases. The next release took place in 2004 with the original trilogy DVD box set. This box set came with its own changes, intentional and unintentional. The most jarring of which put a dark blue color filter over the entire film, making scenes much darker than original. As well as special effects, new sound effects were added which drown out John Williams' award-winning score. These further changes completely degraded the quality of the already questionable special editions. We get our next release only a short 2 years later. In 2006, we get yet another DVD release, except this one is different. How? More special edition changes? Not at all. In fact, it's something in the right direction. The bonus DVD included with each movie came with its respective theatrical cut. Finally, a high-quality, official theatrical cut. Fans were excited when this was announced, but thoroughly disappointed when they put it in their players to watch it themselves. The aptly named George Lucas's Original Unaltered Trilogy DVDs, or GOUT DVDs for short, only contained a standard definition Laserdisc transfer of the already released Laserdisc Master from 1995. This time, however, it was even worse. The version on the GOUT DVD is non-anamorphic, meaning that it was not equipped to be played in widescreen or full-screen modes on modern televisions. You had to watch it in widescreen as if it were being played on a TV with a square aspect ratio. Fans were not happy to say the least, especially since a few select fans with the technical know-how had already gone and done homemade video transfers of these Laserdisc versions themselves. This was part of the reason why the GOUT DVD was so poorly accepted. It was simply because fans had already done this in the years prior. Our next release came out in 2011, this time as an HD Blu-ray DVD master. Again, not much to say, except this master featured even more changes. Eight years later, with the launch of Disney+, the movies were released yet again, and you guessed it, with more changes. Some, like tweaked lightsabers, were for the better, but some were for the worst.
Yes, I bet you have.
These changes also apply to the 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray releases as well. As of the year 2020, these are all the major releases of the original trilogy. Based on what I've shown you this far, it shouldn't be hard to understand why fans were itching for a high-quality theatrical release, so much so that they took it upon themselves to make one. Now, this is when the fun begins, and we get to discuss each of the major fan preservation projects. Let's get started. First on our list is Project Blue. Because of the legal issues regarding the distribution of Project Blue, it's very hard to acquire information about it, so please bear with me. Project Blue is a re-anamorphized HD upscale of the Gout DVDs. An upscale is when you use manual methods or artificial intelligence to increase the resolution of a piece of film or photo. During the time of its creation, Project Blue probably used the more manual side of this process. It's likely the team that worked on Project Blue used some sort of higher quality special editions as a frame of reference when upscaling the Gout frames by hand. The process is not perfect, however, and many of the artifacts from the Gout DVD persisted. Later, Project Blue would become a source used in the widely popular Despecialized edition. Next is Harmy's Despecialized Edition. By far the most popular of the fan preservations, Harmy's Despecialized Edition was the first of its kind and gained much popularity among the fans of the movies. Harmy's Despecialized Edition, or DEED for short, was mainly made by one man, Peter Harmy. Harmy was a simple man with a simple dream. He wanted people who had not seen Star Wars before to be able to watch the theatrical releases first without being forced to see the special editions. Realizing that a project such as the Despecialized Edition would be enjoyable not just to him but for the entire Star Wars community, Harmy got to work. His plan was to use the 2011 Blu-ray releases of the film as the main source of the project. He would then color correct it, rotoscope old elements over the new ones, and re-add removed scenes from various other sources to reconstruct the theatrical release. Project Blue, as well as other upscaled Gout footage, would be the main theatrical sources for this project. Pugo Grande, a poorly preserved print of the film, was also used for timing and positioning purposes. Over the course of a year, Harmy, as well as his team on OriginalTrilogy.com, finished and released Harmy's Despecialized Edition in the year 2011. While only being in 720p HD, the Despecialized Edition is still the fan preservation with the best picture clarity we have, even when compared to other projects such as 4K 77. This is thanks to the significant enhancement and denoising process carried out by the Lucasfilm team when creating the 2011 Blu-ray master. In the end, Harmy achieved his goal and reconstructed Star Wars the way it was meant to be seen, not only doing it for A New Hope, but for the entire original trilogy. The Despecialized Edition set a high bar for future fan preservations that was hard to overcome. Next on our list is Team -1 Silver Screen Edition. For the Silver Screen Edition, Team -1, who worked with Harmy on the Despecialized Edition by the way, wanted to create a more authentic way to view Star Wars. For Episode 4, A New Hope, Team -1 assembled together a series of film reels from various parts of the movie, so that when they were put together, the whole film would play seamlessly. The film then underwent a very minor denoising and degrading process to create a more cleaned up version to account for the damage it had received over time. The Silver Screen Edition may not exactly have had the clearest picture, but it is more similar to the prints distributed to the theaters in the 70s. There was no Silver Screen Edition created for Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi, because a much more ambitious project was to take their place. Our last fan preservation in this list, and by far the best, is Project 4K77, also created by Team -1. Project 4K77 was essentially the same concept of the Silver Screen Edition. However, this time, instead of just being scanned in at HD, it was scanned in at 4K. This project was at a much higher quality than that of the Silver Screen Edition. 97% of the entire movie was scanned from one 35mm Technicolor print. Because these scans were from copies distributed to theaters in the 70s and not from the original film negatives, they decayed much worse over time, so a rigorous cleaning up process was required to get the film back to its original state. It should be noted that this is not an upscale, it is a direct scan of the film in 4K. There were two versions of Project 4K77 created. There was the denoised version, DNR, and the non-denoised version, no DNR. Digital noise, from my basic understanding, is essentially variations of light that appear on film when scanned in digitally. This can often make the film look fuzzy and can be a bit distracting in places. When put on a white background, this digital noise is easy to identify. The no DNR version is probably the most authentic version of the film, seeing that it was a direct scan of a theater-used print. If you were to sit in a theater in 1977, you would essentially be watching this version. However, when compared to the no DNR version, the DNR version is more like the original negatives. The original negatives were of a much higher quality than any copy distributed to theaters, so this means that they have less film grain and digital noise artifacts. If Disney were to make a theatrical release from the original negatives today, it would most likely resemble the DNR version of Project 4K77. The DNR version also looks better on a modern TV than the no DNR version, seeing that the digital noise is more recognizable on a TV screen than when it's being projected. Seeing that 4K77 was taken from a 35mm print as opposed to something like an 8mm print, Project 4K77 has a very high amount of detail. At this point, it's just preference. Would you rather watch an authentic version, or an authentic version enhanced for modern TVs? Whichever one you choose, it's hard to deny the fact that this project is by far the best fan preservation so far. Now, I bet you're wondering, how can I get a hold of these fabulous fan preservations for myself? Well, the answer is a bit tricky to say the least. You see, the legality of these fan preservations is somewhat in question. Fan preservations can be legally distributed among owners of the official special editions as long as they're not bought or sold. This means that if you already own the special edition, you can legally watch these fan preservations. These versions are free, but require complex attainment methods due to legal reasons. Something important to note, however, is that these editions should not be bought or sold under any circumstances. If you go on eBay or Etsy and see a seller offering to sell you a fan preservation, you should not buy it and then report the seller. Why? Well, because if you buy one, then it's going to tell Disney that people who don't own the rights to sell Star Wars are making money off of these fan preservations. Then they'll shut down these projects and there'll be no more theatrical releases. Even if people sell custom box sets of these fan preservations, they're most likely overcharging you for the content you get. I've made my own box set myself, and trust me, it does not take as much money as they are charging. Even if they are just selling art related to a fan preservation, it is still likely to be detrimental to these projects as a whole. Anyway, that's about it. In case you were wondering, Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi have each been given their own gout upscales and despecialized editions. No silver screen editions of these films exist because the 4K projects took their place before any could be made. Return of the Jedi has had its own 4K project, 4K83, and Team Negative One is currently working on an Empire Strikes Back version, 4K80. But that's about it. Those were every major release of Star Wars, as well as every major fan preservation. The level of devotion that some of these fans have to restore an orphaned piece of our culture is extremely admirable. What's more is that it just goes to show how much fans want to watch the original movies. Imagine if Disney did a theatrical re-release today. Many people who hadn't experienced Star Wars like their parents did would get a chance to have a most unforgettable experience. Not only that, but Disney would make a bucket load of money in the process. The theatrical releases are extremely important to us, Disney. Please, we're not saying to remove the special editions entirely. We just want an option to have an authentic Star Wars experience. I want to thank you all for watching this video, and I hope you have a great day.